Thank you.
The gender pay gap has been talked about for years, and now big banks are starting to report the relative pay of men and women. I sat down earlier with two senior women in the Obama administration who had women in the workforce as part of their portfolios. Valerie Jarrett served as the senior advisor to the president and assistant to the president for public engagement and intergovernmental affairs. Tchen served as chief of staff to First Lady Michelle Obama and executive director of the White House Council on Women and Girls. I began by asking them about the move for disclosure of gaps in pay.
What we're finding increasingly is that businesses are understanding that it is a business imperative to achieve gender equity. And so that's why Tina and I are so delighted to be with you today. We're going to have a United State of Women conference May 5th and 6th in Los Angeles, and we're going to talk about everything going on around the country to achieve gender equity. Well, there's so much energy right now, David, and we want to turn that energy into action, share best practices, and give people the tools they need to achieve gender equity.
Well, Tina, tell us about this summit that you're having in May. What's on the agenda, and where does equal pay rank?
Well, equal pay is a big part of the agenda, but it's about women's economic equity. It's also about women's health, about violence against women, child care, women's entrepreneurship. I mean, one of the things we learned in the White House was women don't live their lives in silos, issue by issue. They're struggling with all these issues all at once. We want to have a summit where all the groups, all the activists around the country who are working on these issues can come together at one time and share best practices and support one another.
Well, as we talk about disclosure of differences in pay and gender, and Tina, we'll start with you on this, how important is the methodology? Because we had numbers come out of some banks in the UK, which is required actually over there by the government, and there were huge disparities, but it took into account seniority levels and the fact that men were at more senior levels and made more money. Now we're getting some numbers out of U.S. banks that, oh no, it's just 1% difference, which surprises me.
Yeah, the methodology is key because while it's true, some people might balance out if you're doing the exact same job, but it's key to make sure what is the definition of it is the exact same job. But if you're not also taking a look at your overall business to see, you know, what's the overall disparity when you average out the salaries, because that's where you see the big differences. When you've got senior women making, not enough senior women, and senior men making, way more money, then you're out of balance. Your company is not at equity.
Valerie, you and Tina had very senior positions in President Obama's administration. You were in the White House. How did you address this issue? Because I know it was on your personal agenda to really make progress here. What did you do? What did you try to do that you didn't quite get done?
Well, President Obama created the White House Council on Women and Girls, and our goal was to make sure in all of our programs, policies, legislation we supported, we looked at it through the gender lens. And so our approach was, number one, we called on Congress to pass laws that would set a national standard. We are the only developed country that doesn't have a national paid leave. Puts us at a competitive disadvantage, David, as we are in this global marketplace. We looked at issues like equal pay. We called on Congress to pass a Paycheck Fairness Act so employers couldn't discriminate against their workforce if they shared pay. How do you know you're being discriminated against if you don't know what the pay scales are? And then we also work, though, with the private sector. Businesses are increasingly realizing that they have to support working families if they want to attract and, more importantly, even retain the best talent that they can. And so we shared best practices with them. We worked with advocates, as Tina mentioned, who will come to our summit in May, who are on the ground around the country, bringing these issues to the forefront and developing the tools that employers need, again, to be competitive.
So, Tina, the private sector clearly is making some progress here. Not enough and not fast enough, but it's making some progress on its own. Can the private sector address this without the government? And let me ask very simply, in the securities area, in the SEC, disclosure is the way we basically approach a lot of issues. Why don't we require for the country, for at least publicly traded companies, to disclose pay differences between men and women?
Well, I would hope that we could. We actually tried to do that. One of the things that we did in the Obama administration was, after 5 years of study, we issued an EEOC and Department of Labor rule in 2016 that was very modest, actually, would have required all companies to disclose wage bands and what they were paying people around different salary levels. And unfortunately, I think that my understanding is that rule has now repealed. But disclosure is everything. You don't know if you're being paid unequally if there's pay secrecy. The other thing that companies do a lot of times, David, is they actually punish workers for talking about their pay. One of the other things we wanted to do was ban pay secrecy rules.
And Valerie, I want to pick up on something Tina referred to in talking about the summit, which is childcare. Because childcare is not just over by itself. It is directly related, in my experience at least, to women's progress in the workplace. Because the fact is we have many more single mothers than we have single fathers in this country. And whether it's right or wrong, women tend to have more responsibility. How important is it that we make real progress to catch up with the rest of the developed world, frankly, in providing for childcare?
We absolutely have to. David, 40% of working moms are either the primary or the sole breadwinner in the family. A woman's contribution to the family income is more important than ever, and a major impediment to women rejoining the workforce is often that they can't afford childcare. There are many times where they're paying their childcare worker more than they can afford, and so we have to look at it. What are all of the barriers that are keeping women from achieving and moving up in the workplace? And childcare is an important variable. And as Tina mentioned at the outset, we have to look at it in a very holistic way. We have to look at everything from paid leave to paid workplace flexibility to being allowed to take off work when you're sick pay, equal pay, working so that you can afford to pay for your family's bills, so raising the minimum wage. These are all factors that we have to be taking into consideration in order for women to thrive. And we believe that if women succeed, America succeeds. And so what do we have to do? And transparency is so important. I often have spoken with employers who had no idea there was a pay gap. You have to do the research, and then you have to share it. And that's how you really develop credibility with your workforce, where they know that they can trust you.
Tina, finally. Feels like we've been having this discussion for far, far too long. Have we made progress, and how do you measure progress?
Well, we've certainly made some progress. We see, more women in senior ranks. We see earnings going up. Women are now 50% of the workforce. Women are now 20% more likely to be college graduates than men. But then we also know there's only 6.4% of Fortune 500 CEOs who are women. We know that the pay gap is still, over 20%, across the country. So we've got a long way to go. And it's, as Valerie said, critically important for American business to succeed, for us to get this right. Our talent pool is in, our women, and we need to make sure we're tapping that.
That was my interview with Valerie Jarrett and Tina Tchen, both